Okay, so today I have Shawn Larkin on the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Shawn is the founder of the North American Dealer Parts Exchange, and that is a company where he's helping dealers reduce obsolete inventory in the parts department. So, first of all, Shawn, I just want to congratulate you for being on the number one podcast in the world, Parts Innovations.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a
I know
long
this is
time getting here.
That's right. Yeah, it's a big waiting list. A lot of people really, really wanting to be on here. So
hmm You're doing
anyway,
the work of God.
that's right. Um, so Shawn, we talked before about your process with North American Dealer Parts Exchange, and I want to get into that. But first, I'm curious, what made you come up with the idea for this business?
Well, so I'll tell you what. Uh, More than a decade ago, we remember the 2008, 2009 crash. Everybody felt
Yeah.
it somehow, right? And
Yeah.
business dried up. I was, very early in my parts management days and on that career path, and still very, kind of junior, if you will, in terms of my training on parts, technical training in parts management. And what happened is I have a DP that tells me, trim inventory. And it's like, I'm doing absolutely everything I can possible. I mean, I'm in group 20s. I mean, I have consultants that work with me,
Yeah.
and it's not that, what can I, well, my problem is this obsolete or idle parts inventory. I just can't get rid of it. And the only way to fix the problem is to, or to get to your number, just to trim it, like just arbitrarily trim it just because, we want to save the money, which I understand from a business perspective.
Yeah.
um, Really all you can cut is trim down active inventory, because you're stuck with the rest. You're stuck. I mean, that's
Yeah.
the reality. Guys might think different. There certainly there are some other smaller avenues to start trimming things up: day supply, program orders. But if you're really leaning in on handling inventory, and processes are already in place, you're not. I mean, when the world falls apart, man,
Oh,
there's not much you can do to trim it besides start trimming active inventory. So anyway, I
yeah.
knew that the parts that I had were good somewhere, because the manufacturer has so many of them. So how do we, if I only knew what other dealers were selling this. So it took many years to develop that idea into what it is today. Is basically we use aggregated data from all the dealers on our platform, and try to figure out basically, where does the parts that dealers don't want, where is it actually selling? And we use inventory and sales data to figure that out. Same brand, same country. And but what happens is nobody wants your junk parts, even if it's active at their store, because there's an incentive for them to buy it from the manufacturer instead, unless you're willing to take a huge haircut. But no dealer really wants to take a haircut. But what if everybody wins? What if you could just, you know, virtually figure out where it's like bulk exchanging this, like all this stuff here
Yeah.
that I have is junk for me, but it's active at this store, and of equal dollar, or at least if I could figure out equal dollar with that same store who's going to take my junk that he sells, he has junk that I can actually use. It's a huge ballet in terms of data and
Yeah.
algorithms and such, but we're able to figure that out. That's our primary business. Our secondary offering is relatively new. Is we just sell the idle and obsolete parts for the dealer through e-commerce, through every channel, and the dealer
Nice.
does no work. We handle everything. You get an
Yeah.
email, we tell you send the part out, you bill us, done.
That's important because first of all, yeah, you're right. You don't know what dealers out there in your country need those parts that are just sitting there collecting
Mhm.
dust on your shelves, first of all. And then second of all, parts managers are some of the busiest people I've ever seen. And so
Mhm.
the fact that you can kind of take that on for them and say, hey, we'll sell your idle inventory. We'll kind of manage that e-commerce process for you. You ship it and you pack it and we're done. So I think those two things are very important. I think it's part of the reason why you're successful. And are you in the U.S. right now?
Yeah, so we dabble a bit in the U.S., but like really, it's part of the 2021 strategy here
Mhm.
to move to great depth. In fact, we spent a fair amount of time. We are Canadian based. If you can't tell, I think I speak clear English, but nonetheless, the Americans are like that guy's from the North Pole for sure. They wouldn't be wrong. Um, but yes, to depth, yeah, moving into the U.S. Where
Okay,
we can
good,
service all brands with one of the two programs for sure.
good, good. Okay, awesome. Well, um, you have 5 tips for us today. And I want to ask you something before we get into that, because it's 5 tips on sort of managing our obsolescence, right? And
Hmm.
being better with it. But in what ways do you see most commonly how obsolescence is created?
Right. So those 5 tips, I have 5 tips, but in fact, I actually have 5 hours. But we boiled them down to 5 tips in short order.
Yes. Yeah.
So let's talk about how does obsolete parts even happen. So if we really think about all the return allowance that dealers get throughout a year, whether it's you're a small dealer and you get 50,000 or you're getting hundreds of thousands of dollars, we're applying that, and I hope dealers are, or the majority are applying it to the oldest parts in inventory because they have the least probability of selling.
Right.
But perpetually every single month we're applying it to the oldest stuff. But where does that stuff even come from, right? Like we just think, oh, it's just the oldest stuff. Well, in fact, that stuff originates. Now, if you ask the same dealer or any dealer, you may not have an obsolete parts problem, but you're definitely fulfilling hundreds of thousands of dollars of returns a year back to the manufacturer because you have that return allowance. But you ask the
Yeah.
same dealer, special order parts, return and unsold special order parts, are a problem for a dealer, and they'll say, no, we don't have a special order problem at all. We don't have one.
Right.
But
Right.
but in fact, that's where it all originates from. You dealers just don't focus on it because it's a one and twos and a parts person just taking it off a work order, doing a credit invoice, or a customer just not picking it up. Because it's a ones and twos and happens amongst all your parts guys across many days, right, and weeks. You don't really see it till it stacks up and you're dealing with it on the
Yeah.
backside. Now, uh, provided you're using traditional inventory control and a methodology, active parts inventory, 7% of those SKUs or part numbers, not talking dollars, I'm not talking number of pieces, the SKUs,
Uh-huh.
individual part numbers fall off on an annual basis. So you're making profit on 93% of those part numbers many times in the course of a year, many times over the course of a year. So the problem is not active inventory falling off, and usually when they get in a pickle, they have to trim their inventory because the DP says so, or other things that make them need to trim parts, don't have
Yeah.
enough space. They trim active or get elaborate with or try to get sophisticated with the phase-in criteria. All they're doing is trying to figure out what really happens is they're trying to figure out what can I do to basically use some sort of phase-in criteria that chokes off active inventory so it gives me the result I want. And
Right.
fairly quick-ish, they can trim down their inventory. And in fact, it's because you choked off active inventory. So it looks
Yeah.
like you're
And
doing
it's
the
at a
job.
detriment. It's at a
In fact,
detriment to your
oh
customers, right?
God, yes. So where it starts and where the problem is your unsold and returned special order parts. I mean,
Okay, so, and I agree with you. I think that that's spot on. I think that you could say even 90% of what your obsolescence is parts that you've ordered for a customer and that's where it ended,
mhm,
And so
exactly.
your process for special orders, getting those picked up, or your process for getting things prepaid even is
Yes,
probably critical,
right, exactly.
and we can get into more of that. But yeah, I totally agree with you. Obsolescence is a huge deal. I work for a really big corporation, and I can tell you that, um, you know, I get charged on a monthly basis 7% holding fee on my inventory
Hmm.
from my corporate
Yeah,
office.
yeah,
So I don't want to get charged for stuff that I'm not selling.
yes.
So it's important for me to have a very active inventory, a healthy inventory. What would you say is, maybe just based on percentage, and I know it can kind of vary depending on how big of an inventory you have, but health wise, a good parts manager managing his obsolescence in the right way, what kind of obsolescence percentage is that in his inventory?
Yeah, so there's a couple points I'll make here. So first off, NADA guide, so industry guide, parts industry guide is 2%. 2% of your total inventory should be
Okay.
12 months or older. It needs to be under 2% of total inventory value.
Gotcha.
So that's guide, and anything less than that is you're doing well, and that's reasonable. So then, though, is if we kind of zoom out a little bit, how much inventory does the average dealer have, including obsolete parts inventory and including unsold and returned special order parts which have not aged out yet? So they could be 90 days old, 6 months old. They're not yet obsolete, but they are certainly non-stocking
We're
parts,
on
right, which you
track,
shouldn't
huh?
have.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That number, so best in class, there's been a couple sources of this information that are the same. 20% is best in class. 20% of total inventory when you take your obsolete plus, basically, if you were to take your entire inventory and return the whole thing and then reorder only active parts inventory, you would be, the best in class dealers would have 20% less. So 20% best in class dealers is all the stuff they shouldn't have. Unsold
Gotcha.
and returned special orders that haven't aged out yet, and obsolete parts. The average is 30%. So the average dealer has about 30%. We actually see a range because we get parts inventory data, and we see it across many different dealers, sizes, across the country. There's a wide range, a huge range. So we do see guys who are, in the lower 20s. And in fact, I've seen ones that are using consulting firms and have been for some time, and they have a trained parts manager, and he's been at the wheel for some time. And the companies, the dealerships, huge on processes. They'll be in the low to mid 20s is where they'll be. And that's a great job. As a total inventory of stuff you shouldn't have, and certainly they're under or at 2% obsolete parts. And in many cases less than that, much less than that, like a fraction of a percent that's rolled into now 12 months old.
Really?
But we see the small dealers have it the absolute worst. And the smaller the inventory, I mean, we see micro dealers where they're like in the mid 80% of total inventory they shouldn't have. And but the smaller the worse. And I mean, we see it where, like I'm talking about micro dealers at like 150, 125,000, 150 total inventory. They're in like the 80s, right? But
really,
as a I'm talking about total inventory they shouldn't have, including obsolete, but not just obsolete, right? But then when we look at across the full range, it's 38.7%. Now that fluctuates from 36 to 38-ish percent, but it's definitely like the higher of the mid 30s is where it's at, is where we see.
Yeah. And I've also noticed that if it's not an initiative with the company, like you say, micro dealer, some of these guys don't realize that they have a problem. Is what I found. And once you point it out and you say, hey, wait a minute, your space costs money, you have overhead, you have more overhead than other people. You have to utilize these programs like the one that you've built here, because it's extremely important not to have your valuable dollars tied up in stuff that just won't sell.
Exactly.
So
this is frozen capital that you're talking about. This is stuff that that money that's invested in parts inventory needs to work. I mean, that money is built to make more money, where it's just producing profit, right? It's an ATM, effectively. But otherwise, that profit is used for remodeling, paying your own staff, paying reception, paying for accounting, paying for updates on the building, paying for mowing the grass and moving the snow. I mean, the list goes on. But stuck in parts, I mean, it's just lost, right?
Yeah. There's no use for it. Yeah. Okay. Well, awesome. Well, I guess we can go ahead and get into your 5 points or your 5 tips for us. What would be tip number 1 from you?
tip number one is you kind of hit the nail on the head earlier. Is and the absolute must is prepaying special order parts. If you don't have that, that in itself is an easy way to curb the problem.
Yeah.
Because when someone pays for something, they're coming back to get it for sure. They're now financially hooked to that part, and what it does is it de-risks the probabilities that the dealer is going to be stuck with it. You know,
Yeah.
the some would argue this, but the day that a special order part becomes a problem for the dealer, people
Mhm.
would say day one that I learned that I now own it. So whether the customer said I don't need it, returned it, misdiagnosed it, I
Yep.
would say that the day you order it without it being prepaid is day one when you create the
That's your
problem.
indicator.
That's your indicator. You got to prepay parts. I mean, so the reason guys don't prepay parts is they're first off scared. What do I say to a customer if he pushes back?
Yeah.
Secondly, my parts guys are going to push back. And I would say that the biggest, and then how do I deal with accounting? It's going to be a huge nightmare. My system, my DMS doesn't handle it well.
Yeah.
Those are always, that's always a concern. I will tell you, because I've implemented this many times over in different buildings that I've managed, is it's not actually that hard. So the customer doesn't say, I mean, you just tell the customer, it's special or part, I need you to pay for it. They say,
Yeah.
okay. I mean, if they're not really interested or they're shopping, I mean, they would have said order it and then they're shopping, they're doing whatever else they were going to do anyway. Um,
Yeah.
so prepay and your DMS, you call your DMS support. They'll tell you how to work with it. You talk to your controller, say we're going to do a mock one. I now know how to do it. We'll do a mock prepaid special invoice. Let's look at what it does tomorrow. Let's look what happens when it comes in terms of relieving inventory when we receive it,
Yep.
and then I give it to the customer. And you know the fears that they have on why it won't work are not real. It's all in their head.
Yeah, it's totally you have anxiety about what might happen,
Yeah.
or what the customer might say. And one of the things that I found is making sure that my team understands what happens with obsolescence in the worst case scenario. Like
Mm-hmm.
my team gets paid off of gross profit. Well, if I'm scrapping obsolescence, that gross profit gets cut bad.
Mm-hmm.
We take it right out of there. So in reality, if you are ordering a part, not prepaying it, and not calling your customer to get the part picked up, you are just reducing your paycheck. Period. And it's
That's
out of sight, out of mind.
right.
And 12 now it's going to become a problem and whatever. But the fact is that every month you're suffering for what you did 12 months ago.
That
So
is a key point for dealers who are process driven, like you and the dealers that I've worked with. Certainly, inventory and being charged for your inventory as a holding cost. You had your guys did 7, mine did 10, but
yeah,
nonetheless, I didn't begrudge it. I mean, whatever. I mean, what happened is it held me accountable, right, for my own
definitely.
inventory. But there are a lot of this is certainly the majority are not there. The parts manager is paid off of the performance, like bottom line, and inventory is not part of that calculation. So they're paid off of gross profit less controllable expenses, so people, policy, promo,
Hmm.
and equals at least fixed expense. So before fixed expense gets there, that's where they're a percentage of that.
Absolutely.
Nowhere is there, generally speaking, unless they're charging, putting some parts to policy, like you were referring to, or charging interest on those parts. The
Yep.
majority of guys are not actually paid on inventory. So
Yeah.
inventory is something that they want to control, but they're not really held to it to
Right.
make it happen, provided they're
Right.
even trained.
Yeah.
I'll try not to go down this rabbit hole, but the majority of problems that actually happen or that you see in a parts farm, especially a dealer that's rolling over parts manager after new guy after
Yes.
new guy, the problem starts at the very top, and you got to start by training the guy, and more in particular, training yourself, like
Yeah.
as a DP or a GM, just
You're
enough
absolutely right.
so that I know how a parts department needs to work, so that I
Hmm.
can hold my parts manager and train him then to a standard so that he can, make it a viable business.
Yeah, absolutely. This is why I'm an advocate for if you're part of a company that owns more than, let's say 6 dealerships even. or maybe even less, just a couple. I'm an advocate for having a parts director who knows what a solid inventory is, who knows what these KPIs should actually be, because otherwise, and it's not necessarily, well, you could go both ways on this. I would say in one respect, it's not necessarily a GM's fault for just not knowing. They'd never done it, but in another way, it is their fault for not knowing.
Yeah.
And one good way to alleviate that and to set up pay plans correctly, especially if you're focused on inventory health, is to have someone responsible for that category of the business who knows it. A guy like yourself who can say, look, this is how it should be done. Because otherwise, you just don't know. You just don't know.
Well, here's an interesting point. As a parts guy, if I moved into fixed operations manager and I'm taking over service, I absolutely have to, in a hurry, figure out service if I'm not already pre-trained or training on it before that even happens.
Right.
But often what you see happen is a service manager will move into fixed operations manager and not have any parts training, and that's kind of just where it settles, because service is busy and it's huge, right? In comparison, even though the numbers are basically guide is a dollar for dollar. So every dollar you earn in service, you earn in parts, right? That guide does move around depending on, but I won't go down that path. But nonetheless, it's dollar for dollar is what it should be. So it's equally as important. But it would never be the case that I could be a parts manager, move into service and know nothing about service and let that be just the way it's going to be.
Right. That could not happen. No, that
would never happen. And if it did happen, it wouldn't be for long.
No, it wouldn't be for long at all. That's for sure.
Right. Training.
Okay, awesome. Training's huge. That's a fantastic tip. Okay, what is tip number 2?
It's certainly for the majority of dealerships, service is their biggest customer. And I know some guys have a problem with saying service is my biggest customer, but we'll leave it at that. You got to pre-book in service the customer before you let him leave. So a way to think about it is, first off, if they're prepaid, and even if they're internal, prepay internal, likewise, internal is retail, where I come from. And if they sell the car, they're still on the hook for the part. Why shouldn't they be, right? But nonetheless, we pre-book a customer before we order it in service department. We before the customer leaves, because not only is he prepaying it, but even if it's warranty, we're getting the customer to book an appointment, because then the customer is fitting you in their calendar versus a week later, a couple days later, we're calling the customer. They won't answer the phone. Everybody's at work. It goes to voicemail, goes to another voicemail, goes to another voicemail.
They're out of town. They moved away.
They're out of town. Now you're trying to fit in their schedule rather than them fitting you in their schedule. So what happens is it's they're working, if you pre-book them on the spot before you order it for them, and that's part of the policy and service. And even in parts, I don't order a part unless you have it pre-booked. You're forcing, it makes the customer fit you in to their calendar, or you're fitting into their calendar, so it meshes well, and we're not scrambling versus, when I'm trying to get a hold of them, everyone's at work, they always give you a home number, no one wants to talk to anyone. I won't answer a cell at work. That's how people work. So you're just chasing your tail, right? And guess what happens? You're stuck with a part.
Yep. You're stuck with it, and they may or may not come back, and that happens all the time. And so that's a good point, because that takes some training on the service side too. It takes the service manager and the parts manager coming together and saying, hey, this is the new process. Number one, it's going to get people in more consistently, right? Because we're making them prepay for something. They're financially tied to it, like you said before. And number two, we're going to reduce the chance or the risk of that becoming an obsolete part. So I think that's critical. Absolutely critical.
I'll tell you, I've left the 5th point, the most controversial point of them all. When you can't get a fixed ops guy or a service manager on board with special order parts, I got something special. Number 5.
Perfect.
Stay tuned.
All right. Sounds good. Okay, let's move on to number 3 then. What is tip number 3?
So tip number 3 is first off, you have a special order bin where you keep all these parts. that are prepaid, right, or
Yes.
warranty waiting to go on, because effectively you're going to get money for those.
Yeah.
But nothing over 30 days old. Nothing over 30 days old. And some guys will kind of let them ride. There's no riding. It's like
Yeah.
we know, we tell that with customers, we tell that to service department. They know day 30, that part's no longer for you. That thing is for sale, or
Yeah.
return it if provided you can. I mean, there's different
Right.
scenarios where you can't, because you don't have a return allowance or the program to do that with the manufacturer. So of course now you're just returning the oldest stuff, and that's
Yeah.
new.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, 30 days. That's all you get. There's no 60.
Yeah.
There's no 90. It's no the guy's on holidays come back in 3 months, 6 months, or when he gets paid.
Right.
It's like 30 days. That's the number.
No, that's it. And in a case where, like you just said, guys on holidays coming back 90 days, whatever. What we've decided to do when they won't prepay for the part is set it up on the salesperson's calendar for 90 days and put the name of the customer, the phone number, the part they were wanting, all the info that you can think of. And when that pops up that day, 90 days from now, give them a call and see if they're ready for that and see if they're ready to prepay for it and start that process again. But the wrong thing to do is to order it preemptively and to not have it prepaid and to let it just sit there, to let the customer forget about it. I think that's critical. So yeah, 30 days, that's a big deal.
Yeah, exactly.
And I come from Ford land where we 30 days is like, all right, it's going back. As
Yeah,
long as we
exactly.
can't return it, it's going back.
Some manufacturers don't have that luxury, guys who work with other
Yeah.
manufacturers, but nonetheless, yeah,
Yeah.
that thing is, you get it out of there as fast as you can.
Yeah. And the thing about having to return those things that weren't prepaid for is I get charged for by Ford. I'm hit for 15% of the cost of that part. So effectively I'm still paying something in obsolescence
Mm,
for having a bad process, right? So,
yeah.
it's better than letting it just sit there forever, but not ideal.
Mm,
So
exactly.
what is tip number 4?
So tip number 4, let me give a little bit of context here. We want to think about where do special order parts originate, and we talk about, first off, they are the special order parts, but for the majority of dealers, service is their biggest customer. But service department, if you look at, so let's say you get 2% or 3%, 5% return allowance from your manufacturer. What you'll find, generally speaking, is service is your largest customer. They return the highest dollar value of parts each month of
Mm-hmm.
returned and unsold special order parts for various reasons. We could list a billion of them, but
Sure.
what happens? So they have the highest dollar value, but generally speaking, the service department is not exceeding the amount of versus purchases. They're not exceeding the amount that you would have earned in return allowance from the manufacturer.
Yeah.
Your generally as well is your retail counter is small and returns more parts than you get from in return allowance from the manufacturer, but it's incredibly small. So
Yeah.
where is it where you're upside down, where you're returning more parts than you're getting for return allowance from the manufacturer, and that's from wholesale. Now,
Yeah.
I would say generally the body shops are nice when things line up and they take it and they take every part and they put every part on and
Right.
things work out well. But there are some bad apples in the body shop, and I say body shop in particular because that is the easiest one to get in trouble the fastest
It
because the
is.
orders are so big. You got to cut them. I remember years ago, it was a big thing. We're talking about increasing wholesale, and years and years ago at this point and it was about just getting the number up, and your growth suffers because now you're competing, but then you're getting some of these
Yeah.
guys that are just trashing your inventory, right? But that's not
Yep.
seen because financial statement, we're looking at gross,
That's
we're
right.
looking at sales and then gross, and that's gross is dropping, sales are going up, hiring more people, more drivers on the road, and your
Yep.
inventory is now just cut. Like, so do the study. This is my key point. Do the study on your wholesale customers who are returning the most. If it's at 10%, we'll call that acceptable, right? Body shops, maybe you might want to keep an eye on that only because most of those parts you don't stock unless you
Mm-hmm.
have lots of body shops. At 15% returns, total returns, that's definitely a warning sign. At 20, like, it's a huge problem. And
It
for
is.
me, I'm big on cutting guys who we can't get in shape. Look, I mean, I, you don't go at them, just say, hey, look, we're doing business anymore, time to
This
go.
is over.
I mean, there does come a point where wholesale business is, doing any business is a two-way street. You have to
Yeah,
win and the other customer has to win. When it
that's right.
becomes lopsided and one person's winning at the full expense of the other, in this case, wholesale dictates the price, they dictate the delivery times, they dictate, what you're taking everything back that they say. You're
Yep.
not winning, man. That's not a two-way street. That's a one-way street. And that guy's toxic for business.
Yeah, and it's a partnership is what that's what it is. It's a
Mhm.
total partnership. You can't it's not okay, just the body shop gets to win. Like
Yes.
no, that's not how business works. You both need to have the opportunity to win. And when you're getting trashed, like you're saying, your inventory's bloated because you've got all of these freaking hoods that never got put on because they found it from a junkyard
Hmm.
instead
Yeah.
that was cheaper, whatever the case is.
Sure.
It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
no, it's not. That's not how it works.
Right, exactly. So the wholesale guys, there's some consideration because some of this and a lot of this stuff you'll fill from inventory, um, and depending on your body shop business and the models that you're servicing, even that will come from inventory. So you got to give them a bit of leadway. And guys that are big into diesel trucks, engines, transmissions, they have core returns coming back, which looks bad because it shows as a credit in most DMSs that I'm aware of,
Right.
and it looks bad, but in fact it's just large cores, right? Like injectors
Yep.
are $125, $250 a pop.
Yep.
Um, those cores add up, and they're shown as a return, even though it's a core. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that that is an incredibly important metric to be looking at on a monthly basis. And I actually use a tool. A lot of us here are on CDK.
Mhm.
And it's probably, I don't know, I would think it's the most popular one, at least here in the US.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. So I use a tool from Summit Consulting called Part Sales Accelerator, and that if you look into that, that will actually give you all of those metrics that we're talking about here, and it'll just spit you out a return percentage, right there next to the customer's name, and it'll tell you um, those customers that you're really at risk with, and maybe need to have a conversation with, and it's important to have that conversation because you need to figure out what the problem actually is. Is it a training issue on the part side? Are we selling you the wrong parts? Let's get that
Hmm.
taken care of. Generally, that's not the full extent of the case, but get their side of it. Make sure that you treat them as a partner and make sure they treat you as a partner. It's a great tip. Love it.
Right, exactly. When you will know when you have a problematic parts guy because your guys in the shop are more than happy to tell you. So you already know that's a problem. So
Yeah,
generally, when you have
they
a
have no problem coming up and telling you about it. That's for
zero,
sure.
yeah, exactly.
All right. So to your controversial tip,
Yes.
number 5.
Number 5. I love it because I know there's a lot of service managers or fixed ops managers that are not on board with trying to get parts special order in line. So basically, you have a parts manager trying to fend for himself and he can't get it done. Now, what I had implemented many years back was if we follow and we have all these processes implemented, and even as far as you could even take it a step further and have your service manager initial or sign off on special order parts before you order them all, that
Sure.
they have dates that they're prepaid and your advisors are, on the up and up, then we're
Right.
good. Um, if I have anything roll over to date 31, it's going to your policy. You own it. Now, we don't actually give the part to the service manager because he's like, the hell with you. If I bought the part through my policy, I want the part. It don't work that
Right.
way. It's still the dealer's
Right.
money. In fact, all that is shuffling from the dealer's left hand pocket to his right hand pocket. It's an
Yep.
internal shuffle going from internal policy to internal policy, and you still have the part. But I'll tell you what it does is especially if you're part of a 20 group or part of a dealer group who's paying attention to the financials, and every month the parts manager, service manager is responsible for talking about their financial statement and
Mhm.
specifically tell me what's going on with your policy. Like, I want to
Yeah.
know what's in there. When you start putting those parts to service policy, it gets his attention and they get revved up about it. But if that's the last straw to get him to pay attention, that will get his attention. Now, if a service manager or fixed ops manager is not on board, and he doesn't review the statement, or his DP or the GM doesn't review the statement or hold them accountable to it, they don't show it to them. That does happen still, surprisingly enough. I mean, it
Yeah.
means nothing. You don't care. Put it wherever you want. What do I care? I got better things to do, as according to them.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if you're part of a 20 group or advanced dealership, certainly he's more than aware of his service policy, and that's how you get attention. You will piss a lot of
Definitely.
people off, service guys off. But when you have no choice, you got to there's got to be a wake up call at some point. Look, I got to do something,
Yeah.
and this is what we're doing, and here we go.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that even bringing that up is probably a good way to kind of light a fire, and be like, well,
Mhm.
look, this is how it's just going to have to be. If we keep running into this problem, well, it's just going to go from my asset account into your policy account,
Mhm.
because otherwise it's just going to go to my policy account anyway. And I didn't order the thing,
Right.
So when you present it in that way, I think it would definitely light a fire. It probably cause some tension, but you know what? You can't be afraid to confront people about this stuff. You are ultimately responsible for the health of your inventory, for the health of your sales, all of that. So if you know service is causing most of your issue, it's your responsibility to correct that issue. That's why you were hired. Your people, your team is counting on you to do that.
Right.
So I think that's
Exactly.
a great tip. I think it's great.
Exactly. So we're not making any money off of in the parts department trying to, do a shuffle from one pocket to the next.
Right.
Just like adding interest, holding costs to the parts inventory. I mean, it's to shuffle from one account to another effectively.
Mhm.
Um, but what it is we've got to get people on board, and if we're not able to do it because we can't have people above us do it, above us to implement it, or at least monitor it. Um, I'm certainly going to do it for you. Which
Yeah.
is, like you say, it's my job, right? Because if I don't
Yeah.
get a handle on it, guess who they're coming to see? And they're not
That's right.
interested in excuses,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Catch that problem up front, confront people about it, make a plan. All of these tips have been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for coming up with those, for sharing that. I know we could probably do let's go over 45 tips for obsolescence, but we'll keep
Yes,
it to 5. And,
right. Yeah, yeah,
hopefully we
exactly.
can hopefully we can come together and do this again, because
Yes.
I think there's a lot more to talk about. But yeah, thank you so much for doing this. I really
Thanks for having
appreciate
me.
it. Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, we'll be talking again soon.
We'll catch up again.
All right, thanks, Shawn.
Take care.